Hi everyone, this is me, your instructor for Meta Horizon Inc., Rabindra. So today I'm going to describe about the application onboarding and connector theory part. So once we cover up all these theoretical part, we're going to move with the practical onboarding of a delimited application. So let me describe more about the concept of application onboarding and connectors in today's session. So in today's session, I'm going to describe more about these agenda. So I'm going to describe about what are the authoritative applications, what are the non-authoritative applications. I'm going to describe more about the connectors and integration modules, followed by custom connector development and application onboarding and configurations that we must set up. And besides that, we also going to describe about the application onboarding steps, and these application onboarding steps will also cover what are the aggregation processes and how the data are flow. Besides that, we're gonna have a practical session of integrating or onboarding flat file application as well as a JDBC application onboarding. So let me quickly move into the next slide. So in next slide, we're going to describe more about how an organization stores the employees' informations. So generally, the big enterprises uses different human resource management system software. So this HRMS system is a form of human HR software. So it contains all the entries of the employees within an organizations are stored or recorded into this system. So once this system is implemented in an organization, it provides the easy management of human resources, business processes, and the human resources data. Therefore, these HRMS systems are called the authoritative or valid source of employees, or it is also called source of truth, because this HRMS software contains the informations, and these informations are actually the employee records. Therefore, the first step of application onboarding into SailPoint IIQ begins with the integration of authoritative system to onboard the employee records with a unique identifier. So based on the unique identifier of the employee records in HR system, a digital representation of the employees are created, and this digital representation in SailPoint IIQ is called identity. And based on this identity data, we begin the management, monitoring, modifications of the identity data during its life cycle within an organization. So this is how we describe what a HRMS system is and how this system is integrated into SailPoint IIQ. But one thing to note is that companies can have a separate HRMS system for employees and a separate HRMS employees for contractors. So by this, I want to assert that there can be multiple HRMS system, or an organization can have multiple authoritative systems in order to keep the records of its employees. So in the next slide, I have defined the types of applications which are called authoritative and non-authoritative application. So I won't be focusing much on authoritative application because the definition of authoritative application is, I just gave it to you. So basically, authoritative application holds all the employee records, be it employees, non-employees, or any kind of contractor. So whenever you aggregate it, all the users' identities gets created into Identity IQ. So non-authoritative applications are basically called soft applications, or I would just say these are the applications on which users' accounts are created based on the kind of functionality the user wants to perform depending upon its job. Let's say if I'm from a finance department, then I would be using different kind of financial application. If I'm from engineering department, then I would be using applications such as AutoCAD or any kind of design applications, etc. If I'm from let's say IT department, then I'm going to use more applications where I would need access so as to perform the IT administrative work. So the such kind of applications are called non-authoritative applications. So even though you have your record into authoritative application, these non-authoritative application accounts are required so that you can have access within the applications within an organization depending upon the department you are in. So one concept that we have to implement so as to connect these authoritative application accounts and non-authoritative application accounts are called correlation. So we're going to describe more about correlation in the coming classes. So basically correlation is a concept such that one identity which is created from authoritative applications are connected to the non-authoritative application. So with this there will be efficiency, or there won't be the identities duplicacy. So the main concept of correlation is to maintain only one identity and have that identity connected to different kind of applications, be it authoritative as well as non-authoritative. So once you implement the concept of correlation, all the information related to the identity accounts can be found inside identity cube. So identity cube is basically the 360-degree view. So once we create the identities after onboarding authoritative application, I'll describe more about what identity cube is and what identity cube looks like. So in the next slide, I have described about connectors and integration modules. So basically, whenever we are trying to integrate SailPoint IIQ with any kind of non-authoritative or authoritative application, basically we require some medium to communicate to those target applications. So connectors are the services or the interface which are also provided by SailPoint. So in SailPoint there are out-of-the-box connectors. For example, if you want to connect to the AD application, SailPoint has AD connectors. If you want to connect to the JDBC target applications, then we can use JDBC connectors. And if we are simply reading the user account as well as permission or group information from a file, then we have delimited file connectors. Besides that, if our requirement varies with the out-of-the-box SailPoint connectors, then there comes the situation where we have to implement custom connector development, and for custom connector development we have to use open connector framework. So we're gonna cover up open connector framework in the coming classes. So integration module is the one whenever integration modules like help us to interact with third-party applications. So such applications can be a mobile device management system, or it can also be ticketing system or change management system. So integration modules actually help to transfer the provisioning task to the third-party application. So third-party provisioning and service test integrations enables multiple sources of fulfillment to access in. So in this condition, integration modules are used, and so we can also find the connectors and integration module PDFs or the technical guides in SailPoint Compass. So SailPoint Compass is just like a Stack Overflow for the developers. So anything you have confusion with your codes or any kind of documents you want to source, SailPoint Compass is the mecca for all the SailPoint developers. So some of the integrations are as follows. So service catalog integration supports unified service request experience with integrated governance and fulfillment. Mobile device management integration mitigates the risk posed by mobile devices through centralized visibility, control, and automation. Besides that, Identity IQ security integration also provides enhanced security with improved responsiveness and controls. Therefore, connectors are in fact an interface. So it's just a collection of Java methods and class so that we have the permission to read or write to the target system. So connectors comes with a feature called feature string. So any feature you want to have within the connector should be defined in the feature string. So feature string allows you to change the password, read and write to the target applications, create or discover schemas, and so on. So let's move on to the next slide. So in next slide I have defined about the connectors more in detail. So we know that there are out-of-the-box connector provided by SailPoint such as AD, LDAP, JDBC, BMC, ITSM, BMC Remedy, etc. So the majority of Identity IQ connectors build the data directly into resource object. So what actually happens is that whenever we are trying to integrate into, let's say, the target application A, then we should have out of the box connector provided by SailPoint. Let's say that connector name is connector A. Therefore, we will have a SailPoint connector A in the middle, and then we connect to the target application A. So whenever the aggregation process starts, SailPoint starts reading each of the record that is present in the target application A. Therefore, SailPoint starts reading each of the records in target application A, and that during the time of aggregation, SailPoint will create a raw data representation of the records in the target application A, and those raw records are called resource object. So a few of the connectors, like first build the data into the other structures, so let's say typically map object, and it provides the rule hooks for the custom manipulation of data, data into the resource object, and these rules are commonly referred to as connector rules. So during the time of aggregation, there are various kind of rules that gets executed, such as connector rules, aggregation rules, before provisioning, after provisioning rules. So these rules will be thoroughly described in the coming classes. And besides that, I already told you that connectors come with a feature string. So feature string defines the permission of what the connectors can permit to perform in the third-party applications, such as authentication, discover schema, etc. So some of the feature string we have availability or get. So if the connector has the feature string get, then the connector will be able to read and return a map of a specific resource object by ID. So iterate feature string will help the connector to return an iterator of resource objects. Permission will allow the connector to return permission attributes, and set password will let the connector set the password of a resource object. So these are the steps that we actually follow whenever we have a requirement to develop a custom connector. Whenever the requirements provided by the out-of-the-box SailPoint connectors aren't fulfilling our demand, or let's say if we have a homegrown applications, then in that case, in order to interact with the homegrown application, there might come a requirement to create a custom connector development. So whenever we are trying to create a custom connector development, we have to focus more on this 4 step. One is requirement gathering and design of connector. The second was implementing the open connector framework. The third one is integrating it with identity IQ, and the fourth one is testing. So under the step 1, we have to choose what are the connector features we have to define, and the object types. So these object types can be account, groups, or permission, and then we have to define what are the properties those are related to those object types, like account, group, and permissions. So once we define the architecture and properties of connector, then we move with the open connector framework coding. So basically we follow any kind of IDE, then we have to implement the open connector framework, open connector.abstract connector, and then we have to write the required methods based on the connector feature string, and then ultimately compile and deploy the code. Finally, once the custom connector is developed, we have to define it within the connector registry entry. We also have to define the connection parameters in XHTML page, and ultimately create the application that onto which we are using the connector. And ultimately, once all these applications are configured with the custom connector, the final purpose is with testing, and we have to perform the test of the custom connector development. So we're gonna describe more about the custom connector development in coming classes. So this is the basic idea where you can like integrate identity IQ with different kind of applications. So it can be system of record, which are the HRMS system. So company can have multiple authoritative system, one for dedicated employee and the other for dedicated contractors. We can also have like different financial applications integrated into identity IQ. We can also integrate PAM applications, some JDBC applications, some purchasing application, active directories, LDAP, and different kinds of enterprise applications. So once these applications are integrated into identity IQ creates identities based on the employee records on each of the target application, and that process of onboarding the application data into SailPoint, so that SailPoint creates identity IQ is called application onboarding. But the configurations required for application onboarding depends on the type of applications and the connectors we are using. So basically, like, we have to follow these steps. So the process begins with the requirement gathering from concerned application team or the team owner. So what you have to do is that you have to first create an application onboarding questionnaire. So that application onboarding questionnaire considers all the information that is gathered. It also has to have the identity plan, the connectivity plan, the data format, the entitlement data for the request and aggregation, and you also have to determine the application dependencies and aggregation schedules. So then comes the connector configuration. So once you choose the application type or the connector type, the page refreshes and you get the configuration page. So you have to gather the connection configuration parameters. It can be a username, password, host, port, data source, file path, and then you have to collect the schema and property details, and you also have to identify the ownership for approval and certification responsibility. So once these two configurations or the data configurations are collected, we can further move on with application onboarding. So there are different kind of objects that we have to use or that we have to define to read from the target application. It can be accounts, attributes, entitlements, accounts, and group. So accounts actually represents the user record who may sign into the target application. So based on the unique property of this account, identities are created. For, let's say, in the target application A, employees are designated based on the employee ID. So we, during the time of application onboarding, we can designate employee ID as the identity attribute, and based on these attribute, identities will be created. The others are the attributes. So attributes are actually the properties associated with the account. So the attributes can be a first name, last name, department, employee ID, the date of birth, SSN, the entitlement, etc. So entitlement is specify what action a user is authorized to perform in an application. So basically, entitlement is the lowest level of system access, and based on the collection of these entitlements, we create different kind of roles, which will be covering in the RBAC or role modeling section. And besides that, we also have account groups. So account groups specify a set of security rights and permissions, such as administrator. So basically, membership in the group provides user with group access right. So these are the four basic object types. So besides that, we can also have the permissions, profiles kind of objects. Okay, so these are the application onboarding steps. So first we define the application, then we define the connector type, then we also have to define the account schema that represents the individual account. If that application also contains the group schema or group membership, then we have to define the individual group rights as well. Then we have to define the account correlation configuration. So the purpose of account correlation configuration is to integrate any kind of identities which are created from non-authoritative application into the identity that are being created from authoritative application onboarding. And besides that, we can also define different kind of rules, which can be connector rules, application rules, aggregation rules. So the purpose of rules are actually to manipulate the data or to transform the data based on the requirement, or as well as to customize the resource object on the fly during aggregation. And once all these configurations are made, then we have to define a account and group aggregation task, and we can even schedule it. So once we run these tasks, the SailPoint starts interacting with the third party or the target applications via connectors to read each of the records and then create identities. So this is how the aggregation onboarding works on SailPoint side. So this is the actual aggregation process and data flow. What actually happens is that once I start the aggregation task, so it will be reading the first account in the application. Then it creates the resource object that represents the user record, and ultimately it aggregates each user record in the set one at a time. So that one at a time, that is individual account aggregation. And once the first user record is read from the target application, it says the last refresh attribute date on all the accounts to mark the link as updated. And it also checks if the check deleted setting is selected for the task, then it deletes the account that were not updated in the aggregation run. So this is how the flow of aggregation process occurs whenever we are trying to read each of the records from the target application. So there are two kind of applications we can onboard. One is a direct connection application and the other one is flat file. So a direct connection application onboarding is a method of communicating directly with the source server or the target application and identity IQ. So in direct connection, identity IQ will be able to read and write the information into the target application. So in case of flat file, whenever in flat file whenever we don't have the opportunity to read and write the backend database of the target application, then in such case the backend target application will generate a user report, and that user report is called comma separated value file. So for this purpose we have to use a delimited file connector, and we have to provide the flat file path name whenever we are trying to integrate the application into SailPoint. So we're going to describe more about this flat file application integration in a couple of minutes. So I hope that the theoretical portion of application onboarding is well understood. So we described about the application onboarding, the aggregation flow, the connector types, the custom connected development, and we even described about the two applications we are going to onboard. So one application is delimited file and the other one is JDBC, which is gonna be a non-authoritative application. Thank you. So I'm going to meet you in the next session. So in next session I'm going to describe completely about the hands-on experience with application onboarding. So we'll be covering off two application onboarding. One is authoritative application onboarding, which will be a delimited file type, and the other one is the non-authoritative application onboarding, which will be JDBC application onboarding. Thank you guys. Meet you in the next session.